Hi, welcome to my latest YouTube video and podcast. I'm Ross Rosenberg. I was reminiscing with a friend the other day about the ideas that would ultimately culminate in my Human Magnet Syndrome books. Two books specifically, one published in 2013 and the other in 2017. And I was talking to my friend about how when in my personal life, I didn't have an explanation for why I kept falling in love with narcissists. All I knew was I'd meet someone and they'd be really interesting, super attractive, alluring, intensely familiar, sexy, and I'd jump right into a relationship, fall in love, and it would be an explosion of fun, ecstasy, excitement. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. That's all I wanted. All I thought about was to be next to that person. And then one day, usually 2, 3, 4 months, maybe a little bit longer, something would happen and that person's true nature would emerge and they would be what I would later come to understand, have some form of narcissistic personality disorder or some form of pathologically narcissistic traits. And I was confused. I was thinking, why is this always happening to me? I'm a nice guy, I'm generous, I'm kind, I'm smart. At the time, not just good looking. Why me? Why am I always, falling in love with these beautiful women that end up being monsters? And, I couldn't find anywhere in the literature, I couldn't find any books, I couldn't find anyone that had an explanation. I was reading all the codependency books at the time. And just to give you a frame of reference, this was around 2010, but there was nothing there. And so many of you know this story. I've told this story so many times. The story is in all of my books. It's on some of my YouTube videos and my full-length seminar videos about getting this idea of this concept, this idea, this metaphor, analogy, whatever you want to call it, is the symbolism of a dancing partnership. The leader who commands the lead and knows exactly what he or she wants, and the follower who submits and becomes pliable and understands intuitively what to do, where to go, what direction to fall into, just naturally. And that whole idea was the dancing couple, the dancer who leads, who needs, who's in control. The narcissist needs a dancer who is pliable, passive, intuitively and accurately compliant and predictable. The dance couple, the opposites, dancing leader and the dancing follower, became this first metaphor analogy that would become eventually at the basis for my Human Magnet Syndrome book. And then when I wrote my book, I used a magnet as another analogy. The North Pole and the South Pole are oppositely charged. And the two opposite charges bring each other together, just like a magnet. So I added to this dancing concept, the narcissist codependent dancer concept, magnets and magnetism. So then I created this relationship compatibility continuum that mathematically demonstrated how codependents, caregivers, matched up with pathological narcissists, care needers. And then I came up with the definition of codependency, which ultimately is a person who gives all the love, respect, care, trust, and protection, wants it to be reciprocated, wants it to be mutual. But the partner they chose, the narcissist, can't and won't, and therefore stays in a relationship. And then one thing led to another, and I came up with codependency personality types. I eventually renamed codependency to self-love deficit disorder, so on and so forth. So it was a matter of necessity for me to somehow navigate myself out of the insanity of my life, for which no one had answers. None of my therapists knew what to do. The most they could do was say, well, Ross, the problem is you have a broken picker. And actually, this was really big. You always pick the wrong person. And by the way, I say this story all the time, so you probably have heard it. And the other therapist said, the problem with you, Ross, always tell me my problems. They were good therapists. Well, your problem, Ross, is you fall in love with the same woman, but a different face. And that is when a new idea opened up. In addition to the opposites being compatible, the dancing couple, the attraction being inverse, the magnets, then it became something that spoke more of how someone who's codependent or self-love deficient and someone who is narcissistic interact via an unconscious mechanism played out in the falling in love process. And I've written about this in all my books, and that process is called limerence. Limerence is a term coined by Dorothy Tanoff in 1979, who basically put words and an explanation to what is a universal phenomenon. It's what happens to all humans. We are wired that way. We have evolved that way. We cannot resist it. It's built into us. When we fall in love with someone who is inversely matched, the magnets, who is a perfect opposite match to the dancing couple, and who represents what I call the matching of a relationship template. Now, this concept I've discussed in many other videos, but it'll suffice to say the relationship template is this unconscious knowing of what feels familiar and what feels attractive. This unconscious knowing of someone you want to love. This unconscious connection, unconscious attraction to someone who is going to be your intimate partner. That is chemistry. Two people meet. Human magnet syndrome. Codependent, narcissist, opposite attraction come together. The relationship templates also match up. The relationship template is best understood as the automatic rules that have been built into our psyche about what type of person feels comfortable, likable, and lovable, familiar, and safe so that we can open up our heart to. And that love template, that relationship template, is built during our attachment years. So if your parents, let's say they were normal parents with normal problems, but they unconditionally loved you, you would go through your childhood attachment stage and come out of it. And in late adolescence or early adolescence, when you would start to fall in love romantically with someone who loved themselves, who wanted another person that loved themselves too, that would feel safe. And chemistry then works around the opposite matching of two healthy people who love each other, who respect each other, and who care for each other. So that's the human magnet syndrome with healthy people. That's how the relationship template works out. But the relationship template for narcissists and codependents are very, very focused on the opposite matching of their personality types. So if you were raised by a narcissist and as a child you underwent major trauma, you had to mold yourself into the type of person the narcissist wanted, liked, enjoyed, or the type of person that would keep out of trouble, so that you learned that you couldn't be yourself. In this early time in your life, from age 0 to 6, you learned that you couldn't ever be yourself, your spontaneous self. You had to adopt the version of yourself that the narcissist parent wanted so that you would get the conditional love and therefore be the favorite, the likable one, the trophy child. From that experience, your relationship template is built. No different than if both parents unconditionally loved you, that you would come out of your childhood, adolescence, loving yourself, and that relationship template would play out in this automatic human magnet syndrome attraction with another healthy person, but opposite. So that's a lot of information to get to the meat and potatoes of this video, of this podcast. And it's about limerence. It's about falling in love. I want to tell you guys, you don't have conscious control of it. It doesn't matter how much therapy you're in, how smart you are, how experienced you are, how many marriages or divorces you've had. Limerence is the interaction of relationship templates. If you are an SLD, a codependent, going back to what I just said, you were raised in a hostile environment and you learned that you could only be loved or you only were lovable if somehow you were what that narcissist needed you to be or were not what they didn't want you to be. And that whole process not only formed big parts of your personality, but the relationship template, so that when you are, say, 21 and you're, say at a coffee house with a bunch of friends, or let's say a friend's party, regardless of your gender and your orientation, there's a person who you meet, and let's say that person was brought up in a really healthy environment and had what I would call self-love abundance, and you're an SLD, self-love deficient. You're going to pick up a vibe that is going to make you feel nervous and scared. You won't know what it is, but something doesn't feel right. You're going to feel insecure. You won't know what to talk about. And within that interaction is no chemistry. So the healthy, perfect person, no matter how beautiful they are, they're just not going to feel like they fit. The relationship templates aren't oppositely matched. What is not familiar feels unsafe. But assuming you're a heterosexual woman and a heterosexual man who is pathologically narcissistic, say they have narcissistic personality disorder, and they're charming, affable, cute, telling jokes, dressed very sexually appealing, sensually appealing. They have a command of the room. Or another version, this woman meets a man who is so intense and brooding about his life and about how things have been tough for him, but he's survived, and he talks about himself, and himself. Well, the relationship template is unconscious. That's familiar. You know what to do. You've done that your whole life. You listen. You let yourself be absorbed into that person's world. You smile, and it feels safe. What's safe is familiar, and that creates the limerence. Then, boom, the human magnet syndrome, dysfunctional limerence. I call it limerence on crack. That is the limerence of an SLD who up until that point was deeply lonely, suffering from pathological loneliness, deep bone-aching pathological loneliness. All of a sudden, the person who is gorgeous, who is equally interested, because now he, and this is the opposite version of the relationship template, the pathological narcissist sees this person as loving, sweet, patient. She listens, and I'm quoting the narcissist in her thought process. She listens to everything I've said. I told her about all of the bosses that tried to fire me, and I quit and felt compassion and got it, that I'm a survivor. When I told her about all of these angry, vindictive women that I broke up with me or I broke up with them, she got it. She saw how I was treated unfairly. Oh, she's beautiful. I love her. Well, that's the opposite side of the relationship template, reacting to what is familiar and safe. And boom, the limerence explodes. Limerence on crack. Limerence to an SLD, a codependent, and a narcissist is exponentially stronger, more intense. Normal limerence, healthy, self-love, abundant people of all types with all type of problems, it's intense. You can't sleep much. You think about them. You crave them. The idea of hearing their voice. You talk to them on the phone. You fall asleep talking to them on the phone. You look at their picture. You long for their touch. Well, that's normal. We're built that way. And it's impossible. It cannot last forever. Our brain has evolved that we go through limerence, and from limerence we come out of it and we connect to a more stable lover but friend-like relationship. And that is powerful and that's compelling. But for the narcissist and the SLD, the codependent, that limerence is a ticket out of their nightmare. It's a ticket out of their misery, the ticket out of their loneliness. By the way, pathological narcissists also have pathological loneliness and core shame, and it's exponentially worse. So both are just ecstasy. They cannot get enough of each other because they don't really have a connection to a social group. They're isolated in their own ways. The codependent, the SLD, might have a lot of friends, but it's isolated in that no one really gets to know them. And the narcissist is isolated because they have a personality disorder. They're narcissistic. All of a sudden, nothing matters. It is a complete loss of identity. It is two people who are in existential pain find bliss and existential delight and euphoria. Well, as I explained before, limerence has a lifespan, or if you want to talk about it in medical terms, a half-life. If you're lucky, 6 months. I've heard stories where it goes longer, but typically 2 to 3 months. But if you're self-love abundant, that doesn't matter because the next stage is as good, if not better. It's a deep, rich, meaningful relationship. But for the SLD and the narcissist, there's going to be a screeching halt to limerence. And what happens is the narcissist's true nature, whether they have narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder, or some combination, it manifests. They quit trying to hide it. And then the codependent, who is so deeply enthralled in this relationship in love, hits a wall and crashes into the reality of a person who's not really nice. Now remember, the definition of codependency is a person who gives all the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection in a relationship, wants it to be reciprocal, can't make it reciprocal, and stays in a relationship. Now, reminding you about the definition. So now the SLD or the codependent is faced with the fact that their dream lover is not very nice all the time. Alone, they can't face the prospect of breaking up, being lonely, alone, and overwhelmed by shame. So they have to ignore all of their fears and anxieties and find a way to cope with the narcissist, either by just complying, dissociating, and there's so many different ways that SLDs find a way to cope with the narcissist's new real personality. And that is the beginning of the SLD narcissist relationship, as we understand how opposites attract each other, using the dance concept, the magnet concept, the relationship compatibility theory, and understanding limerence and the genetic, the biological, the evolutionary understood concept or process of limerence. So the narcissist and the codependent, as my dad once says, it's funny, he was such a narcissist and he was so curious to see my book when it was first published. and he couldn't wait. And I gave it to him. He goes, okay, so where in the book is that the quote that you said, that quote you told me you wrote about me? What starts off as a soulmate always turns into a cellmate. And of course, I showed him on what page. He put it on his coffee shop, and he was so proud of me. He'd show people my book and where his quote was put in it. So there you go. This was a review of all of the concepts of the human magnet syndrome and a reminder of how we are unconsciously attracted to an opposite person that feels paradoxically familiar and therefore safe. And if you're an SLD and you fall prey to limerence, you get swept away in a dream euphoric experience and wake up to the nightmare. And I tell you, as a former codependent, a recovering codependent, or what I call someone who's recovering from self-love deficit disorder, someone who loves themselves, who is self-love abundant, that you can solve what makes us drawn, what makes you drawn to narcissists. You can solve that relationship template of yours. If you can heal the primary wounds and the trauma and all of the other stuff that is involved in the making of self-love deficit disorder or codependency, and if you can resolve it and you can get to the trauma that has caused it, which is what I do as a treatment provider. I have an 11-stage treatment program called the Self-Love Recovery Treatment Program. And it lasts anywhere from around 7 months to 12 months, and it permanently resolves SLDD. It heals the trauma responsible for it because I've created trauma interventions, techniques, ways to reprogram people who have been gaslit to help my healing the inner trauma child. Trauma integration method is to reverse what was once indelibly stained in your life and to become self-love abundant and therefore change your relationship template and and I quote this for those who can't see this, your human magnet syndrome attraction to narcissists. So I hope this was helpful. And please, 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 if you are an SLD and you can relate to everything I've said, which means you once fell prey to the most beautiful, gorgeous experience of limerence that lasted way too short and was taken over by misery, that you're like an indentured servant to your codependent narcissist relationship. Get one of my books. Come see me for my treatment. I have a Patreon program that offers all sorts of services and content that is not regularly offered. It's exclusive. Or somehow find a way to fix that broken picker of yours. All right? Be well. Self-love is, don't ever forget, your birthright is self-love abundance. If someone took that away from you, you can find your way back to it. Be well. Bye-bye.